Hello, everyone. I'm Shawn Schutt. I am the Prevention Education Coordinator for Underground Railroad, and thank you for watching this video today. So, as some of our viewers may know, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So, what I've been trying to do then is bring in community members to have discussions with them on what sexual violence prevention looks like for them, as also a way to potentially have other people in their same roles see this video and give them some kind of idea of how they can incorporate sexual violence prevention in what they do, or how they can be of assistance to organizations like myself at Underground Railroad in creating that change in our communities. So I have here today two teachers that I work really closely with, Blake Felsing and Stacey Eager. So could both of you just introduce yourself?
Sure. So, as Shawn said, I'm Stacey Eager. I teach at Heritage High School in Saginaw Township. I teach both freshman English and a class called Peer Counseling, where it's kind of a cross between a communications class, but with a big focus on how to help students learn to deal with their own personal problems and conflicts.
And I'm Blake Felsing. I teach at Swan Valley Middle School. I teach sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. I teach a health and life skills class that kind of focuses on exactly what we're here to talk about, along with other life skill items that we get to put in. So it's a pretty cool, unique course that I get to teach.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for the introduction, and thank you for joining me today. I know that this is cutting into your after school hours, so I appreciate it. So thank you. Um, but really, kind of just like jumping into the discussion, what does sexual violence prevention look like for you specifically in your role?
So I think in my role, besides the peer counseling class, we also have a peer counseling office where students can come down and talk about problems and conflicts they have in their life. And at the high school level, relationships with significant others is going to be like at the forefront of things that they're really struggling and grappling with. So I think helping kids just identify what does a good relationship look like, because if they don't learn that, then our fear is if they engage kind of in these negative relationship behaviors or unhealthy behaviors, what is the rest of their life going to look like? So I think my role is pretty crucial in getting them at this young stage when they're just starting to explore relationships with other people.
Yeah, I think that's a real good point. This is something we focus on a lot with our eighth graders. Like I said, I'm sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and we really look at trying to get these kids as they're getting ready to start relationships. We talk a lot about in the high school level, you have things like homecoming events and prom that you get to go to, and things that we don't have here at the middle school. And we talk about managing. Uh, your strong emotions that they're going to have that they haven't really experienced before in their life with other people. So we talk about managing those strong emotions and things like that. And I think it's important too at the level that I'm at is to like we talk about what it means or what it looks like to us is educating them on what sexual violence is, because to them they might say, "Oh, sexual violence is just rape," and not understanding that there's a lot more to it than just that.
Absolutely. And to kind of add on something that Blake said, like in terms of those strong emotions, I think by the time kids get to maybe eighth grade and definitely in high school, they are not necessarily confiding in their parents or other adults in their lives as much as we would like them to. They're turning to their friends. They don't necessarily want their parents or their people at home to not like their significant other, or they don't want to get in trouble, and so they turn to the other place they spend a lot of time, which is school. And so they're going to turn to their friends. They're going to turn to us as trustworthy adults, and kind of share those problems and those situations they might find themselves in.
Yeah, I think it's really cool and interesting working with so many different teachers, knowing that just because of the work that you do with them where they have to see you every day for at least an hour, maybe more, depending on if they have you for multiple classes or if your class periods end up going longer. But they have to spend that time with you. And it's really cool seeing that relationship develop with students where I can tell you I've spoken with students after classes that from both of your classes that I can tell really trust you and know that they if they had something going on that they could come to you and talk to you about those things. So it's really cool seeing the ability of teachers being able to kind of mold their students with that trust. But on that flip side, like you were saying, Stacey, it does make it really difficult because they don't necessarily always share those things with their parents. So my role then when I go into your classes and have these discussions with those students, I'm always wondering what they are telling their parents or if they're having these discussions with their parents outside of the classroom because if they're not, preventing sexual violence can be a little bit more difficult. Because if they're only hearing it from me or they're only hearing it from your one class, the behavior changes that we need to see or the behaviors we don't want to see happen, we don't get to have those conversations more than just that little bit.
Right, right. And I can just tell you, you were in my class just this week, and the number of kids who were like, "Oh, I love it when Sean's here," because you give them another perspective. You're another voice in their life. Sometimes they do, tune their teachers out as just one more adult in their life. And so I think even the role you play is important because you're an outsider. You don't have any stake in the game. You're there just to give them the information and let them decide what they're going to do with it. And I think that's powerful. You don't place any outside expectations on them when you're there.
Yeah, kind of building on that, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with, building the relationship with those kids is super important because some of them, especially at the grade level that I'm at, are scared, like you said, that my parents might not want me to be dating or they might not want me to, even be talking about this stuff. And then you have kids who are doing it anyway, or they think my parents aren't going to understand what it is. So I think it's important to have, you know, your voice come in and talk to them. And like I said, build relationships with those kids where they're comfortable coming and talking about it and not just out exploring and doing things, without, having somebody that they can go to and talk to them and kind of educate them on those emotions and those feelings that they're having.
And even to add to both of that, I've had experiences where maybe not the student in the unhealthy relationship, but a friend of theirs has come to me and said, I remember when Sean was here, or I remember when we talked about this. My friend is in that relationship. What do I do? And so I think us giving their peers the tools to have those conversations with their friends is important and powerful as well.
Yeah, and especially we know when looking at in terms of prevention, especially like with my background in public health and prevention work, where if we want to change behaviors, we have to change the viewpoint of those behaviors, and that's really coming from peers. If peers understand specific behaviors are inappropriate in a relationship, or they understand that you shouldn't be behaving in a certain way when engaging in a sexual encounter, if they can deliver that message into their friends or to other classmates, it changes that viewpoint then in that classroom, in that friend group, in that school on what behaviors are okay or acceptable or which ones aren't. So being able to have that impact on those students to be able to have those conversations is just great.
Absolutely.
So then, kind of moving on to the next question. I know that we've talked a bit about building the relationships with students and how important that is to be able to help them understand healthy relationships, help them understand what things are okay or acceptable. But as teachers, what else in your role can be done and used for violence prevention work?
So I'm going to say, understanding that we're kind of on the front lines of everything. We are the ones who are with these kids a lot throughout the day and over the years, and I think it's important. Um, to help, like I said at the kind of the beginning, is to educate them on what this is. How do I manage these emotions? And really just kind of inform and teach them, what they need to understand about healthy and unhealthy behaviors and relationships. And I think it's important too, like I said back again at the eighth grade level, we're looking at and we use statistics a lot of times at the high school level. I'll show them things, with ninth graders or 11th graders and say, yeah, you're not there yet, but we need to make you aware of some of these things so that when you get there, or if you're there, or can you recognize these types of behaviors, and just be there for someone that they can go to and we can talk to and express kind of these feelings with them. So I think a lot of it is just being at the forefront of it, and being able to talk to those kids about those things.
I agree. And I also think for parents and other community members out there, recognizing that they can reach out to us, if they know that their student is struggling with something. What I find is every once in a while I'll have a student who really struggled during the year and I never really knew why, and then the parent will reveal something much later in the school year, that had I known, we could have been an extra support system, for that student and their family, because as Blake said, we are on those front lines. So this is something that we do see and we deal with, and we've got resources available. And so just recognizing, the old adage that it takes a village to raise a child, and so this is really a true community effort, to make sure that we are helping all of our children lead healthy and productive lives.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'll add to it, because I know, especially in your class, Stacey, where you teach English, you use books and materials that often reference healthy relationships or unhealthy relationships to have discussions then on what behaviors happened in there that were bad, what behaviors were good, so that they can kind of use the media that they're taking in to be able to recognize the unhealthy and healthy relationship aspects to it, or even navigating those sexual encounters when it comes to that time. And as sure as both of you are aware, it's one of my favorite things to talk about in my presentations is talking about media and throwing that in there. So I think that's another kind of layer to it, is that the things that you're teaching don't necessarily have to be relationship focused, but when you can use those examples or use some pieces of it and say, okay, so now referencing the healthy relationship discussion we had, or referencing the discussion we had on consent, just bringing in those extra pieces always helps reinforce the messages, because I get 4, maybe 5 class periods with them. So having that reinforcing material throughout the school year really does help.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think in an English classroom in general, we get to have those conversations probably more often than any other content area, with maybe the exception of health. Um, and like you said, looking at relationships as a whole, it doesn't always have to be, a relationship with a significant other. There are definitely toxic friendships out there and abusive friendships out there, that you can see the threads of those, in books we read and stories we read and characters we analyze. So there are definitely times that I pull stuff, from things that Shawn has presented in my room and use it in my other classes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, because like I said, with me teaching sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we do a lot in the younger grade levels with, what does a healthy friendship look like? What does a toxic friendship look like? And then through the sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, we can kind of tie those into some of the same behaviors that you see in those toxic friendships, like maybe isolation can be warning signs also, and when it comes to a dating relationship that you might eventually get in. Same thing with me teaching life skills. There's other topics that we do and things that we talk about where we can pull in kind of the relationship stuff with, which I think is really important, and a lot of it comes back to communication when we're doing stuff as well. So I think that's important to be able to pull in, and I think those are some good points that you guys brought up there.
Yeah, so you guys have both mentioned parents a bit too in this discussion. So what would you like parents, if there's parents watching, to know about how they can assist you better in kind of this prevention mindset or this prevention idea?
I I think one of the first things that jumps out as a parent myself is, and it's something I remind myself about, is just to recognize that relationships, whether they're in middle school or high school, are important to the kids in that moment. As adults, we sometimes kind of say, like, well, you're young, wait until you're older, wait until you really fall in love. And that doesn't open the doorway for kids to want to confide and talk openly. Um, so, kind of reminding our parents and community members to maybe hold some judgment back a little bit, and reserve any of that need to feel like we need to give them advice and tell them what to do, or say, no, you can't see this person, and instead really try to listen to what our kids are saying to us, um, and watch for some of those warning signs. Educating themselves on what an unhealthy relationship looks like goes a long way in raising kids who recognize those signs as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here at the middle school level when it comes to, especially with parents, is we get a lot of parents who are all over the board. When is it okay for my kid to start dating somebody? When is it not okay? Is the relationship serious? I think, like Stacy said, we have to understand that these relationships to the kids are serious, and even though a parent might say, "Oh, you're young; it's not that big of a deal." The kids are taking this serious and it's serious to them. So I think being open with them and understanding, how they feel and their strong feelings on this. I also think it's important for them to too look at the data and look at the statistics that are out there as far as the number of eighth graders that are considered dating or the number of ninth graders that are considered dating. I think when you look at those numbers, you see that they're a little bit higher than what a lot of adults think. And I talk to kids about this. There are kids who are like, "I'm not talking to my mom and dad because they don't take it serious. They don't think it's like that big of a deal." But understanding that to the kids, it is that big of a deal, and just having that open line of communication, especially at a young age, and starting that at a young age is really important.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll add into this too is that going speaking specifically to, like, they might not take it seriously, or they might not believe that their kids are dating in the first place, or they might not believe it's that big of a deal at the time. Um, your kids also might be participating in sexual interactions with each other, and ignoring that that might be happening isn't going to help them be able to fully understand how to have a healthy sexual encounter or a good sexual encounter. Because if they're not learning it from you, or they're not hearing those positive things from you at home, they're still learning it from somewhere. And by the time I've gone into eighth grade classes, or I've gone into ninth, 10th grade classes, I already have to help them unlearn behaviors they've learned. I'm not teaching them anything new, because they can't learn anything new from me until they've unlearned some of the things they've already learned, because they're learning it either from their classmates or their friends, or they're learning it from stuff online. So unless you're willing to have those conversations with your students about what a sexual encounter is supposed to look like, or what consent is supposed to be, and then modeling and reinforcing those things, specifically around like consent and respecting their boundaries, that's how they learn how to have healthy relationships and healthy sexual encounters.
I think a big thing that you said in that is huge is what these kids have at their fingertips with devices and the internet and social media and all of those items that are right there with them, and they can access that. And if we're not educating them on this stuff, they are going to look other places, whether it's friends, whether it's the internet, whether it's social media, or look at the things that they see that's around them. That's where they're going to get that information from, and that's where they are getting that information from.
So to say all this stuff about social media also doesn't mean just fully restrict their access to the social media, because Kids are smart with technology. They're going to figure out one way or another to either get on social media or do things behind your back. So having these discussions with them to help them understand what things are acceptable or okay is really going to be your best bet, because then they're at least going to know that they can trust you. They're at least going to know that they can trust you to have those conversations and come to you when something is wrong instead of like trying to hide it from you. One of the examples I use with students all the time is that one of the reasons that teens don't report dating abuse or don't report if they've been assaulted or hurt by somebody else is because their parents have told them they don't want them dating yet. And now if they've heard from their parents they don't want them dating, and now they're in a dating relationship where maybe they are being abused or they're experiencing some of those warning signs that we teach them to look for, they feel like they can't go to the parents now because like, well, if I tell my mom or my dad, I'm going to get in trouble from them too. And they don't want that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and really, if we look at our lives honestly, fear controls a lot of us. And so the same is true for young people. And right now, their fear is getting in trouble and disappointing the important people in their life. And so we just, as I said earlier, and Blake has said it, we just want to make sure they've got good information to help them support each other and make better decisions.
Yeah, I've seen exactly what you're saying. I've seen and heard kids say the same thing, and then also the back, to the communication piece with the parents and being open. And some kids are like, "Well, I've never really had any discussions with my parents. I don't even know if they know I'm dating or if they're okay with me dating." And so I don't even know that I can go talk to them about something like this. Is another thing that we see as well. So I think those are two big things right there.
So then moving forward, what are some barriers that both of you have encountered or know are present when it comes to doing sexual violence prevention work, especially with your students?
I definitely think at my grade level and where we're at is you have just different families with different ideas of when this should be taught, what should be talked about, how much detail should we be going into, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen here is um, I like to look at the statistics and the data, like I've said a couple times, of what are these kids doing, are they in relationships, what's happening, and then driving it from there. But I think that it's really important to we walk a fine line with some of these topics that we talk about at the age level we're at, and I think having parents understand that we want what's best for the kids. And we want these kids to grow up and be healthy individuals and practice, safe relationships and healthy relationships. And the biggest thing that I see is, I don't want my kid to hear this. I want my kid to hear this. Why are we not teaching this? Why are you talking about this in eighth grade? And here we do have a committee that has board members, teachers. We actually have high school students that sit on it, along with some parents, which I think is good. It's good to get that input, but for me, the biggest barrier is you've got all these different viewpoints of who, when, and why, and what we should be talking about, and trying to walk that fine line and still educate these kids on the things that are actually happening right now with them is probably the most difficult.
Yeah, I think these are uncomfortable conversations we sometimes have. And I understand for parents, they worry about what's the message my kid is receiving. Um, and and so they sort of lash out at teachers occasionally in schools. But as we've said throughout this whole conversation, kids are learning things, whether it's coming from their parents, teachers, their friends, social media, TV. Um, and so we need to remember it's okay to have uncomfortable conversations, because if we don't model for students how to talk about that stuff, then they'll never talk about it. Um, I had just a parent this year who was, kind of concerned, and was concerned that we would be talking about sexual assault And, the parent said, I don't even think that's something adults should talk about. And I, could hear kind of that fear and panic in his voice. Um, and we had a really good conversation about why it's important. And he ultimately was okay. But it was him knowing that he could call and talk to me about that, I think was key. And just keeping that doorway open between parents and schools and other educators, and knowing, before you sort of let that anger or fear build up, call and talk to us. And I'm sure that we'll be able to kind of put your fears at ease. And as Blake said, we have the interest of our students at heart. We're not looking to step on anybody's religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs, or the way that they want to raise their families. We're not looking to undermine any of those things. We're really just here to support and make sure that we have healthy kids.
I think a huge point there too is the communication piece with the parents as well. And when you get, I've noticed. I mean, I taught elementary school before I moved to the middle school, and when you get to the middle school as a teacher, you really have to work a little bit harder than at the elementary level of making sure you're creating relationships and the parents understand you and communicate with the parents, because when they're younger, it's emails all the time, it's phone calls all the time. And when you get to the older grade levels, you really have to step up, and especially with these topics, with the subjects that we teach, get involved with uh, relationships with the parents, so that they know that what we're doing is to be in the best interest of their kids as well. So I think that's a really good point there too.
And to kind of take what both of you have been saying into account for this point is that parents need to realize that teachers are educating to students who are coming from very different cultural backgrounds, belief backgrounds, religious backgrounds. You can't just teach to one. You have to be as general as possible. You have to be as all encompassing as you can. And to some people, that's going to be difficult for them. Like, not saying anything about what school districts want to do with what terms of education in terms of health class, but I can tell you, I know from studies that have been done that abstinence based only education around sex doesn't work. Kids are still going to have sex. But if they're not learning about safe sex, they're not learning about consent, or they're not being able to have those conversations in their health classes, they're not able to learn then what those encounters are supposed to be like. And if they're not learning what those encounters are supposed to be like, we're setting them up to have really bad sexual encounters then. And we don't want our kids to get hurt, obviously. But if you're coming from a place where your religious background is abstinence only, your kid being exposed to those things might be a shock to you. But it's again that willingness to have those uncomfortable conversations, because while that might be a shock to you, it's going to be important information for them to have.
I think that goes back once again to, I can't stress enough the communication piece with the parents and the students. And, like you said, if they're here, they're exposed, they're hearing all of those things. So then you can sit down with your kid and say, hey, this is where we're at. This is what we think. This is what we believe. And then allowing, without those conversations with your kids, it really just makes it really difficult, because like you said, we're teaching to all different types of backgrounds here, and it can be tough to do without some kickback, from parents. So I think that's important for parents to hear. Once again, talking to your teenager about these things is so important, and keeping an open line of communication. And really, it's kind of interesting because I have a lot of teachers like, I have no idea how you teach what you teach. And it's like when you see the need for it, and the fact that these kids want to hear some of this stuff, and the questions that they have, you're like, this is really important. And that kind of goes away, and you see, there's a real need out there for some of these difficult conversations and things like that because the kids have questions. They really do.
So then to kind of wrap up this discussion, what would be something that you would want the community to know to kind of make your ability to do sexual violence prevention with students a little bit easier, other than the communication with parents and making sure that parents are having these conversations with their kids?
That's a good question because I think communication is so vital. I think some of the things we've mentioned, attending school events. It seems like a little thing, and I understand everybody's life is really busy, but getting out into the schools and kind of getting a bird's eye view of your student, your child, but then also their peers and what that environment is like. Um, I think talking with your kids, not necessarily about their own relationships, but even about the relationships of their friends. My husband rolls his eyes daily and he comes out and he says to me, I can't believe you just listened to our kids talk about so and so who's dating so and so and the current drama. And I just said to him, if I don't listen to those stories, they're not going to want to tell me their own stories. And then also listening for how are my kids interpreting their friends' relationships, because that's where I can really kind of take that opportunity to teach my own children, is by listening to how do they view what their friends are going through. Um, and so I think those would be my two suggestions for parents, is to get out there into your schools and then to listen to your kids, not just talk about their own, but what's going on with their friends, and look for those opportunities to teach at home as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on with that. I think that's so important. Like you said, those are little things that you can do, and getting into the school and seeing, what these kids are doing, interacting, going to, extracurricular events, and it does sound like something little, but that's a huge part of. It's really easy to stand on the outside and think you know what's going on with the kids and inside the building, but until you're in here and involved, I think that's a really important thing. So I think that's a great suggestion there.
So thank you both for joining me for this conversation. It was a really fun conversation for me to have, especially since this isn't something I get to usually do with the teachers that I work with. So thank you for both for being willing to join me for this.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for having us.
So before we sign off here, is there anything else that you would want a parent listening or a fellow teacher listening to know around sexual violence prevention?
I think that the big thing is kids are always listening to us, and even at the high school level where they kind of put on this facade of I don't really care what my teachers think of me, they do. And so each day is an opportunity for us to make a difference and build those connections. um, and Sean and I had talked about at one point, how to get more people involved and reaching out to coaches and other content area teachers. And so just letting those teachers know you can have these conversations no matter what class you're in.
Yeah, and I think that's huge. Exactly, what you're saying about, especially at my level, educating people on what sexual violence actually is, because they have a narrow perspective on what it is, and I think it's really important for them to understand, the full grasp of what it is, and what our kids are facing right now with that.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both, and thank you all for watching. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My name again is Shawn Schutt. I am the Prevention Education Coordinator for Underground Railroad. I will have my email as well as my work phone number in the video description below. Please get a hold of me. I love talking to new people. I love answering questions. And if you have any of those, please feel free to reach out. But thanks again.